I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hanselminutes. Today I'm chatting with Howon Lee. He's a senior software engineer at CodeRabbit. How are you doing, sir?
Doing all right. Yourself?
Very well. So CodeRabbit is a AI code review tool, and I wanted to talk to you about that, but I'm more interested in the short term about your perspective on code reviews as a political act. What do you mean by a political act in the sense of office politics?
In the sense of office politics, well, Scott, an incredible amount of our business, an unironic 10, 20, 30% of our business comes in completely, basically they hear that we exist. And there's an incredible proportion of software companies today where there's something political going on with the code reviews. Bob hates Charlie. Okay, Charlie hates, Dennis. Somebody hates somebody else. And that affects the office politics in this material way. So it's an incredible amount of our business, and it just strikes us as an incredible thing that happens in the modern code reviewing point of view. Code review.
When I think about adulting, I try to explain to my kids, I have a 19-year-old, that being an adult and going to work is a lot like group projects at school. And when you do a group project in college or, you don't really get a chance to pick the group. Sometimes you're assigned the group, and sometimes the group goes well and it meshes, and it's like, oh, these guys and gals are great. I love working with these folks. And other times it's like, this one doesn't do any work. This one does all the work. This one is pushy, and this one's quiet. Like, it feels like adulting is mostly just group projects. And I wondered, do you think that an AI code review tool could cut through the politics by being completely apolitical?
We are not apolitical with respect to, we are completely neutral with respect to Bob and Charlie. We just don't know Bob and Charlie. We're not we're not some divine thing coming down from on high. We are a third party. We just don't know you. And that's always a virtue in any review process, right? Academic peer review, which is supposed to have this quality control element to it, that code review is also supposed to have, is always anonymous. And people don't do anonymous code reviews, right?
Yeah.
We are anonymous in as much as we don't know you, you don't know us.
Large language models care about context. And within the context of a code review, there is the code, but then there's also what was the code intended to do. So there's specifications. There's sometimes context that happens outside the code, like in the GitHub issues, in the pull request. There's whole conversations. Do you look at those things? And can there be beef that people have that could get picked up on that could potentially affect the large language model because it's context? It's like, wow, Howon's really mean to me in the code review, in the GitHub issue.
We get a lot of people buying just because somebody else is mean specifically, right? You ever hear of Linus Torvalds, big outbursts, or saying, okay, this open source project has a bad reputation for the maintainers being mean people. It's always within the scope of a code review. It's always somebody has put up some code and they don't like it, and now they're going to be mean. So context. So a lot of people ask us, why do you exist? Why can't we just ask for a code review in Cursor? And the reason why we exist and why you can't just use Cursor or Copilot or Windsurf to do the things that we do is that when we call up to the LLM, only about half of our LLM calls end up being the actual code that we are actually reviewing. The other entire half of what we call up to the LLMs with is just, we take entire Jira tickets, we take your linear tickets and just form them into an LLM compatible format. We take entire portions of your code base. We make a graph out of your code base using this arcane proprietary way that'll mesh with any language that you'd like. Um, we have proprietary clustering algorithms with respect to your code base. So we take only context, and this actually has better results than literally copying. You can do this nowadays. You can copy your entire code base into a Gemini call, but it won't be as productive as the stuff that we do at CodeRabbit. So we are technically an LLM wrapper, but we are a very strange LLM wrapper.
Well, that's actually an interesting topic in itself, because a lot of people will say, there's a joke around town that, if your company is just an LLM wrapper, then it won't succeed. I think people are learning very quickly that to minimize work by simply pasting into large context windows is an oversimplification of work itself. The LLM is a kind of a black box. We don't completely understand why it does the things that it does, and it's not always deterministic. So there's a lot of interesting, kind of pre-chewing of your food that can and should happen. And you should be very intentional about what you send to the LLM. So I'm hearing you say that there's a lot of intentionality in those proprietary algorithms, because if you simply get ChatGPT and paste some code in and say, review this for security, you're not getting the full
You cannot do
context.
this. You
Yeah.
cannot do that.
Yeah. Why do you think people think that, though? Why do people believe that, I can just paste this into Gemini, or I can just ask Copilot? Why is that special sauce needed?
People, you cannot understand an LLM as of the state of the art. We have them, but we cannot understand them. Anthropic by far does the best work on trying to understand them, and they don't really have it. And this state of affairs has actually held for almost the entire time that we've been using deep neural nets for anything useful, including before the LLM revolution. So without this control, people have this, there's this notion of the god of the gaps, right? Where God, God is throwing thunder at you unless we actually know what thunder works. And then now, okay, God is not doing thunder. Static electricity is now doing thunder. Um, and the behavior of LLM is fundamentally a gap, in our knowledge that has basically withstood everything science could throw at it for the 15 years that really good neural nets have been existing. So
That's an interesting perspective, because the God of the gaps concept is this idea that if a thing that I can't explain happens, that must be God, right? If it's lightning, it's thunder, like you said, then that there's evidence for God, and there's a moment there where you can have confirmation bias, where if you see something you don't understand, you decide, wow, God is inside the large language model. What do they say? Everything is a conspiracy when you don't know how anything works. And
and
if
we
I
don't know. We must be honest that we do not know how they work.
Yeah.
We must be honest.
But this is more than a stochastic parrot, right? There's the stochastic parrot argument that a lot of people have said is not a good analogy. I like it. A really clever parrot talking back to you is an impressive thing, because it's like, who doesn't like a parrot that talks English? But if you gave a parrot a code review, I doubt that it would do a very good job of it, even if you gave it a statistically large code base.
Right. I remember meeting with John Searle and talking about his Chinese room argument. Perhaps more than a decade back. And obviously, the stochastic parrot is basically an argumentative descendant of the notion of the Chinese room. Uh, you have a person with a dictionary with an infinite Chinese dictionary who doesn't actually know Chinese, that says, okay, look up, you get the room itself. You just stick some English words in there. The person looks it up in the infinite Chinese dictionary, and you get the Chinese back from the room because the person just looks it up, copies it without understanding, and puts it back. This is central to most of the arguments that we get around the notion of the stochastic parrot. And the difficulty with this argument is in the details, right? Having the notion of an infinite Chinese dictionary, well, there's differences in practice and basically a lot of things that seem like engineering, but also like are appendaged to should be appendaged to the actual philosophy of it, right? Scott Alexander, the professor at I think University of Texas, had a long paper about what is the nature of the Chinese room, that we should use computational complexity to think about it, right? Computational complexity, it's an engineering thing. Like I think about computational complexity every day. So like saying, okay, the parrot is possible. The parrot is not possible because, oh, okay, like we have these engineering factors that we put in order to make the parrot go fast enough so that it can search the vast, incredible space that possible language lives in. We have searched the vast, incredible space that possible language lives in, and it requires like techniques to exist which are incompatible with the dictionary. But you can't say that to a philosopher, and you can't say that to people to think about stochastic parrots, because philosophers like, oh, it's just engineering. So it's weird to have engineering feed back into philosophy, but it is apparently happening now that we have something that can do language.
Do you think it's useful? Because I think that analogies and trying to understand, feeling out what's going on with these analogies, whether it be the parrot or the Chinese room argument, those are all examples of us trying to understand what's happening, because it feels like, to use yet another analogy, we finally have enough computing power to give an infinite number of monkeys an infinite number of typewriters, and now they can write Shakespeare. Literally, that is happening.
One analogy that I actually like for what's going on for right now is alchemy, right? Before chemistry was an actual science, there was alchemy, and people were just saying, okay, like let's take some lead and make it into gold. And we know, like in the modern day, that it's possible with nuclear physics, but we also don't care about it, right? So we have all these like ancient and incredible like notions to deal with like the phenomena in our world, like intelligence, even the notion of intelligence, the notion of speech, the notion of language, that are some in large ways kind of like the alchemical notions of the prime materia. Oh, is the world composed out of monadity? Like, is the world monadic in nature? Is the world like a lot of these arguments that we have that the ancients and medievals had that we do not care about because like we have a different worldview. Okay, like is the world composed of 5 elements like the Wuxing master is thinking about? Is there an elixir of immortality? This is a silly question to ask now that we are in modernity, because what we know chemistry can do is like, okay, you can make dye, you can make medicine, you can make plastic. You cannot take lead and make it out of gold. Go ask the physicists. So
So,
I
so the concept of modernity, though, you're saying that like Leibniz's
modern
perspective, Libnitz, how do you say it?
Libnets, yeah,
Leibniz. So Wilhelm Leibniz, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, had this idea that the world is like the universe is these self-contained units called monads. It's kind of like atoms, but
yeah,
it is made of atoms. It's just not the way he thought it was, and they're not as
right.
interchangeable as they were.
They're
And
not
people right now
interchangeable.
are acting like LLMs are interchangeable.
We need to have new words. We need to get
That
rid
is
of the old
true. We
words.
are out of words.
Like we are out of words.
Yes. Large
We
language
have
models
this.
have made me feel like we are finally out of words. Let's get some new, cooler
Yeah,
words.
we got intelligence. We need some new word for what we do and LLMs do that have the commonalities and the differences. We have the notion of truth. They are bullshit machines. They have no notion of truth.
Hey, friends, this is Scott. We're going to take a break in the middle here and shift to a quick conversation with Shaylin Gimby, who is a new sponsor with ShareGate by WorkLeap. I've been talking about maybe moving my Google suite over to M365, and that migration has got me a little concerned. I'm worried. Shaylin, what do you think is the biggest mistake that might slow down my migration, and how can I avoid it?
I mean, not managing sprawl before and during the migration is definitely the answer you're going to hear from a lot of people. You know, it's like moving to a new house, but packing up every random drawer full of junk and taking it with you. It's just not a good idea. But that's not just the only issue. That also comes with, security risks. Managing all of your data isn't just about keeping it clean and organized. It's about keeping things secure. And if you don't, you're going to have lack of control over data and end users, external threats in the self-serve enabled environments that you have. That's why at ShareGate, we help clean up before the move. Our tools detect unused teams, sites, and groups. IT managers can track everything that's being shared externally and schedule governance and compliance reviews to manage that risk.
Very cool. This is one tool to migrate faster and secure your tenant. ShareGate is an out-of-the-box Microsoft 365 migration tool. It's packed with best practices. You can check it out at sharegate.com, and we thank them for being a sponsor. Doesn't it feel like we should be focusing more on the artificial and less on the intelligence? Because it feels like artificial intelligence is two words, but it's almost one. And we're using AI because AI has good mouth feel. People like to say AI. They keep forgetting the A part and keep focusing on the intelligence part. And I would argue that there's no intelligence there yet. It's the things around it. It's the context. Right? Yeah.
A lot of the context. We have a verification engine. It's not perfect, but an entire AI agent, quote unquote agent, in order to basically find hallucinations and just stomp on them, which is possible because of the nature of code, right? You cannot do such things with like political speech or philosophical treatises, but we can do it in code, so we do.
That is a really great point. I like that. So bringing it back to the point of a code review AI engine within the context of these arguably unreliable narrators that are large language models, the difference is political speech, my blog, a recommendation that you have a code, you have an LLM generate for a friend. None of those things can compile. The compiler is us reading it and going, it seems like it's good English. It seems like it's good grammatically, right? But code compiles, it is correct. It can be mathematically proven. So verification adds value in a huge way outside the context of the large language model, which seems like a really important aspect of a code review. It's not about opinions. And code reviews, to your point about being, internally political conversations is, well, I don't know, Howon likes that code, but I think this algorithm would be better. Those kind of like little BS arguments can be solved mathematically and apolitically.
Yeah. Like, we still want you to do code review. We still want, people still have to do politics because politics is inevitable. Corporate politics is inevitable. You have 3 people in a room, politics still inevitable. But we have heard decisively from customers saying we do less of it now. And less politics is good politics.
That's cool. Okay, so you're saying that people using CodeRabbit, providing smart code reviews, treating the AI like a member of the team because you can talk to it within the GitHub pull request, fitting it into your workflow, you're saying it tampons down, it chills people out, so it's a tiebreaker of sorts.
The holy war, people like to say Golang's only contribution to the the science of computing is Go format, and a lot of Golang's underlying ideas quite ancient and just they just did a good implementation, but they're not wrong about Go format being a decisive contribution. Just saying this one's right. Stop arguing, please. Thank you.
Okay, so for context, for folks that are listening who may not be familiar, Go format is an auto formatter, an indenter, it's a beautifier, it's a pretty printer. So tabs versus spaces and all of these things, it all goes away if you have.
These things do not exist in Go, right? So CodeRabbit often ends up being of that nature for people in other languages, right? We actually have integrated every linter we could find, 40 of them. We're planning on 50 more. But in addition to saying, okay, we're running every linter we can find, auto-configured for you, people just have a third-party person saying, third-party bot saying, okay, this matters, here's a bunch of nitpicks. We already made these nitpicks. So a lot of the holy wars in computing are about nitpicks. Does like Emacs versus Vim really matter? You can just choose your own in a modern, decent software shop. You can choose your own IDE if you want. Okay, like people can choose Cursor in a modern, decent computing shop. But they still get into holy wars about it because of the smallness of the arguments, right?
When you were describing that, you caught yourself and you said you're talking to a person. I mean a bot. And that's a thing that we naturally do. It's a very natural thing to do because we're anthropomorphizing these objects. And when an agent like CodeRabbit is participating in a conversation, where do you see CodeRabbit living in my workflow versus something that's more like Dependabot? Because when bots first introduced themselves into pull requests and into issues, you would send them commands. It was almost like a command line interface via chat. You'd go at Dependabot, and then you'd say rescan or whatever. But with CodeRabbit, it is more conversational. Do you want people treating it like a team member, or do you want it treating it more like a bot?
Well, we got more than 20,000 chat conversations with CodeRabbit every day. And by my estimate, looking at the open source chat conversations, like 40% ends up being people thinking to bot. So you hear about Sam Altman saying, oh, we spend millions on people thinking to bot. We spend tens of thousands on people thinking to bot.
Thanking it, saying please and thank you. Do you think that there's value in that? I personally do, just because it maintains our humanity. I think we've been spending many years yelling at Alexa to turn our lights on and off. And I think a please and a thank you is always the nice human thing to do. But I understand that it does cost money.
Well, we don't mind the expense. People like doing it. You do it for yourself. If you were the last person on Earth, and you were talking to, there's a value in and of itself into being a decent human person, and being polite is part of being a decent human person. So even if you say, okay, this is not really a human being, the LLM is not really a human being, saying this other that we have with respect to us is neither lesser nor greater than a human being. If you are relatively equal to an other that exists philosophically, then you must be polite to it, right? I'm not sure if you're a big fan of the term other in continental philosophy, but there is a great other that issues commands to you, and there's a lesser other that you issue commands to and you have power over. But the LLM, it's just a mouth saying things, so it's not better than you, it's not worse than you. It's just an object.
I find it interesting that you are a guy with a master's in computer science, but you're really rooted in philosophy. But then you mentioned earlier in the podcast that you found it odd that philosophy is intertangling itself now in this world of AI, but this is the situation that we're in. Were you always into philosophy, or did you get into it within the context of AI to better understand the things that you're building?
Well, my degree was symbolic systems, it's called. It's philosophy and linguistics and computer science. So people have been grasping with the notion of the artificial person, basically since they were talking about the golem in medieval Jewish theology. They had made up the golem to tell to little children, oh, okay, here's this clay man that could do things. And then the theologians took it and saying, well, does the golem have a soul? Does the golem have a soul?
Does it? Well, I think what would the argument be? Does it matter? It's other from us, so we should just assume everything has a soul and be nice to everyone.
Well, we have to make up words that are not like soul, I think, which kind of makes me sound a little bit dour and, oh, okay, gray and everything. But we have to look at things from a non-religious direction.
Yeah, I mean, golem might not be the right term, but I think the point is whether or not something has a soul or not doesn't mean that it doesn't give me the permission to treat it with cruelty or casualness. So I tend to be a please and thank you. How's it going? I even apologize for interrupting LLMs because now we have advanced voice mode, and I'll interrupt and I'll say, I'm sorry, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt there for a second, and then I'll add on to something. And people look at me like I'm a silly, like, why would you talk to it like that? And it's like, because I don't want to talk to it like that and then accidentally start being rude to another person. Right. I don't want it to get stuck I don't want rudeness to be stuck in my mouth and then I fall into bad habits.
Politeness is an end to itself. You always hear about these 19th century Victorian gentlemen officers who are like, oh, yes, we're surrounded and we're all going to die. Yes, please give my regards to my wife, kids, et cetera, that sort of thing. Politeness,
well, so back to the context of an AI within a code review system like CodeRabbit. We've determined that there's like special herbs and spices, proprietary algorithms, things that you're doing outside. You've got verification, you've got algorithms, both ins and outs. And are you finding that code review is giving people that CodeRabbit code review is giving people better experiences than Claude Code, than dropping things into ChatGPT because of the magic around it? Because the magic isn't the LLM. The LLM for you is the interface more than it is the magic.
People systematically get better results on almost everything if they have some context building apparatus around things. Because if I were to manually do CodeRabbit's context building on an example piece of code from our code base, it would take me like 4 hours manually, like probably something like that, like, and with a lot of judgment and finickiness. So that context building is not nothing. And we do get better relatively objective, I say, results on our internal evaluations. And we send our internal evaluations to OpenAI and Anthropic sometimes. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. So are you LLM non-specific? Can people pick the one that their company prefers and still get a great result?
We use everything all the time. You have the option to for on-premise things, but what ends up happening is sometimes Anthropic will come out with things and we will just push it onto production 90 minutes later because we have been talking with Anthropic for like the previous like number of weeks about, okay, here's this prototype we have. Okay, that's nice. And it was nice. And this is great. And we're going to ship it 90 minutes after it's released. Or sometimes we don't when it's less nice. So having the choice, we care about the LLM and we deal with the LLM all day, every day, and we talk to the LLM providers. So that's why we don't like give you a choice except in the on-premise installation for enterprise customers.
Because there is a philosophy right now around developer tools to like have a drop down with a picker,
right?
And you just pick one, right. But that assumes that people know or care or are sophisticated enough to have that drop down. And I've believed that an orchestrator LLM that picks the right one for the right context makes more sense than having me choose. Because I honestly couldn't tell you the difference between Claude 3.5 and 3.7 other than one of them is a bigger number.
For example, 3.5, 3.7, 4.0, like drastically increases in verbosity. And we're literally currently, like one of the evaluators is in the other room doing this, figuring out how to tamp down the LLM's prolixity. The LLM is paid like Charles Dickens. It writes some whatever, okay, now it gets a penny. Therefore, it writes like Charles Dickens. Maybe not as well, but definitely as much in quantity. So tamping that down, that is a surprising amount of the job. 5-10% of the job.
Why are they so chatty? Like, I understand that we
Well,
pay by the token, but like, we pay by the token, but like, is there something about the essence of them? The fact that they're paid like Charles Dickens by the word is different than why they seem to be so darn eager. It feels like the system prompts are wrong. I always have to tell it, like, make it short, make it crisp, make it accurate.
People have definitely noticed that prolixity also helps the actual performance on more objective tasks like code bug finding, code writing, that sort of thing. But so it's the business of these LLM providers entangling itself, but also helping out with the model creation aspects. Why does prolixity help? Prolixity may have reasoning elements to it. Why does reasoning help? We don't know. We know why it helps us, but is that the reason why it helps the LLM? We don't know.
Well, it does.
And we have to be honest about ourselves not knowing. We have to be honest.
Well, it's funny that we're on a podcast, and prolixity is such a great word, like to be unnecessarily and tediously wordy. Hopefully, folks won't find us, podcasts in general, or this show to be an overly prolix episode. But I definitely learned a lot about philosophy, the philosophy of LLMs as it relates to how computers and humans interact, and then how using an LLM and an AI system like CodeRabbit to put into my life could potentially make things better and make my coworkers more chill, and hopefully have a slightly less office political pull request, because nobody likes code reviews. And if there's a way to make it better for people, then I am for that. So I understand that folks can sign up at CodeRabbit.ai. There's a 14-day free trial. It's pretty cheap for individual developers, but there's also a pro version that has like a lot more sophistication, linters and integrations with Jira and things like that. Is there anything else that we need to know about signing up for CodeRabbit?
Open source, free forever. IDE, free forever. Or at least until the venture money runs out.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Howon Lee, for chatting with me today.
All right. Thank you.
This has been another episode of Hanselminutes, and we'll see you again next week.